I just recently started a second job about 2 weeks ago at Frisbee Middle School as a teacher's assistant. My first day as a teacher's assistant at Frisbee Middle School, I was introduced to my student who I was going to be working with throughout the day, named Ashley, a 7th grader. And we started off our day in her first period class, in her social studies class. To my surprise, her class was not like this class, well-behaved, polite. I was met with disorderly conduct, with yelling from the students and the teacher, and this continued throughout the day. From first to third period, it was the same situation. I thought maybe, it's middle schoolers, that's how they are. But I was surprised to find out around her fourth period that they were preparing for their standardized testing that the No Child Left Behind Act highly regards, and is really important to the schools, considering that if they don't meet the required proficiency, students and the school are subject to the school being shut down, to teachers losing jobs, and students losing teachers that maybe they valued highly. The reason why I mentioned my first couple days, or my first experience with Ashley and my experience at Frisbee Middle School, is because just to give you an insight of how these schools are preparing for the standards of the No Child Left Behind Act, how they're preparing for those high standards that the No Child Left Behind Act requires. Diane, I wanted to argue, or to make the claim, that No Child Left Behind is an ineffective policy, that it has a negative effect on students, a negative effect on schools, and a negative effect on educators. Diane Ravitch, the former Assistant Secretary of Education under George W. Bush and education historian, supports this claim. In an interview on NPR just last year in 2012, she argues that that students are being negatively affected by the No Child Left Behind's high standards by being taught how to test rather than a well-rounded education that she feels is important in a student's academic career and future roles as citizens, that will enable them to become better educated, well-rounded, and more informed to make better decisions. She also believes that she agrees with my second point, that the No Child Left Behind Act targets students. This is done by, the high standards that the No Child Left Behind Act requires. And just to clarify a little bit, I'm pretty sure some of you guys are aware of what it is, but just to clarify, the No Child Left Behind Act, which was signed in 2002 by George W. Bush, asks that students are proficient in English, math, and all the other academic subjects by 2014, which is coming up pretty close. So to my second point is that students that are being negatively affected are being targeted by those administrators and educators that are being pressured into gaining those proficient scores. They're doing so by, like Lorenzo Garcia, who was the former superintendent of El Paso, Texas, and who is currently sitting in federal prison right now for fraud, reporting bogus test scores in order to gain the financial gains that the No Child Left Behind Act promises if you do meet that level of proficiency. Students who are being targeted, like from Lorenzo Garcia, are not only doing it for financial gains, but like bonuses, but also in order to maintain their jobs. And they're also coercing teachers, administrators, school boards, like the most recent scandal of the 35 Atlanta School District employees who were indicted and accused of cheating to inflate their test scores. The third negative effect is on the third negative effect of the No Child Left Behind Act is on the schools. Diane Ravitch, again, the former Assistant Secretary of Education and former supporter of No Child Left Behind Act with their strict standards, feels that the schools that don't meet the proficiency levels aren't being dealt with properly. They're being taken over by charter schools, by businessmen who follow the market model, and then if they follow that way, they exclude teachers' input, parents' inputs, and this, she feels, is not helping the No Child Left Behind Act or the education of the students. One of the other more, I guess, authoritative voices in this debate about the No Child Left Behind Act effectiveness is Margaret Spelling, who is the former Secretary of Education under George W. Bush, who feels that it's no longer viable and that it needs to be readdressed. So in conclusion, again, I just really quickly just hope that you guys got the understanding that the No Child Left Behind Act is an ambitious and admirable goal. However, it has its flaws, and even the former advocates like Margaret Spelling, the former Secretary of Education, and the former Assistant to the Education Secretary don't agree that it's viable anymore.
All right, it takes you almost 2 minutes to get to the claim. I like the background example, but you need to get through it a little quicker so that we know exactly what the inference is that you want us to believe. There's a good layout of what the three issues are going to be, although it seems a little bit rushed. The internal structure you signpost clearly during the presentation. You're very dependent on the one source, the former Bush Secretary of Education, Ravitch. You quote her in 3 different places. It seems like that's the only evidence that you have on the first point, and she comes back again in a later argument. So that's pretty important. The good part about it is it's reluctant testimony because it's a former supporter of the law that's saying that it doesn't work. It does sound sometimes, though, that you're paraphrasing her instead of quoting her directly, and you definitely want to make sure that you are giving us direct quotations here because especially if we're dealing with a reluctant testimony, we're going to be giving credibility to it. It's much better if it is a direct quote. The examples that you have of people cheating on this, the notion that that's related to No Child Left Behind needs to be a lot more strongly developed here. I don't know where you got the inference that it was a result of No Child Left Behind that led the El Paso superintendent to be cheating this way, especially if there's personal gain that's involved. That just sounds like he's a crook. The teachers in Atlanta, there might be some relationship there to No Child Left Behind, but again, there has to be some explanation and evidence to support that, and I thought that was a little bit problematic. Those are the only 2 cases that you cite of failure. I don't get any statistical information that says that we're not achieving those objectives, that the students are not reaching their potential, that they're learning less than they used to, and that seems like that would make that argument a little bit stronger there. I did like the summary that you had at the end, and I thought you had a good exit line also. Thank you all for your patience tonight.